Hello and welcome to the third series of webinars from Emergency Services Times. I'm Catherine Levin and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. Our intention with this series is to continue conversations that we had at the Emergency Services Show, and for this webinar we had both Suzanne and David speak with us at the show. We wanted to continue that conversation and particularly today look at the topic of culture. In our webinars, we ask our speakers to share their work, provide their insights, and give you something to go away and talk to your colleagues about and for your own development. Our unique selling point is that we are multi-agency, and we always want to get the views from across the blue lights. The webinar is a chat, so we have no presentations, it's no slides, it's a discussion, conversation that leaves you inspired to find out more. We have a Q&A function, which you can use. You'll find it on the side of the screen. So please contribute questions, and where we can, we'll introduce those into our conversation. You'll also receive CPD accreditation for the webinar today, and if you're watching catch up, you too can receive that at a later date. Our plan today is to run for 50 minutes in total. So let's get started. I'll introduce our speakers who should appear on the screen shortly. See Suzanne and David, there he is. So if you could just both come off mic at the moment, then you can join us. Lovely, thank you. Okay, so I'm delighted to introduce David Crawley and Suzanne McCarthy. David is Director of Business Growth and Fundraising for Crimestoppers, and Suzanne is the Independent Chair of the Accountability and Liaison Board for the National Guardian's Office. She's also the Independent Chair of the Fire Standards Board. Welcome to you both. Let's find out more about your organisations first. So, Suzanne, could you first tell us about the National Guardian's Office and a bit about the Fire Standards Board for our audience, please?
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I'd like to say I'm really pleased we've been given this opportunity, as you say, to continue this conversation. It's so relevant today on values and culture in these emergency services organisations. The NGO, the National Guardian Office, for those who don't know, leads, trains, and supports a network of over 1,000 freedom to speak up guardians in England in the healthcare sector, and also conducts speaking up reviews, which we've done on the ambulance service, into speaking up culture and what can make it work in that particular environment. The Fire Standards Board, which I chair, is responsible for the production of professional standards for England's fire and rescue services, and several of those focus very much on speaking up and encouraging a speak up, listen up action culture, leading the service, leading and developing people, communications and engagement, safeguarding and code of ethics. Together they help champion an environment conducive to speaking up. So I think the combination of those two is very important for our discussion today.
Great, thank you very much, Suzanne. And David, would you like to tell us a little bit about Crimestoppers?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Just like to explode a couple of myths, actually, right at the start. First of all, we're not the police, but we work very closely with them. And secondly, we're not Crime Watch, which everybody thinks Crimestoppers is part of, but we also work very closely with Crime Watch. Crime Watch is an independent charity. It's been established for over 36 years and has provided over those 36 years reporting services for those who wish to speak up about crime, wrongdoing, or when something just isn't quite right. And they have that ability to do that by passing over information that is 100% anonymous, or keeps the person who's reporting 100% anonymous. We're approximately about 110 employees, and we have 350 volunteers out across the UK talking about Crimestoppers and working to keep communities safe.
Okay, can I just pause this just slightly there? Priya, in the background, I've still got the go live button on my screen.
Yes, we are live.
We are live, lovely, thank you. Just checking. I had a question in the chat about saying, is it working for anyone? I just wanted to double check that was okay. Great, thank you. Let's carry on then. We've learned about Crimestoppers, we've learned about National Guardian's Office. So let's talk about some terminology, which I'd like to clear up as well at the beginning around whistleblowing, anonymous reporting, speaking up. So first of all, could you, Suzanne, help us with the terminology of whistleblowing? What do you mean by that?
Well, whistleblowing is a very precise term, and it's about reporters who report certain types of wrongdoing, which must be in the public interest, which means it has to affect others. They can raise concerns at any time. It could be something that happened before, something that's happening now, or if they believe it's going to happen. It can be a criminal offense, health and safety, risk to the environment, miscarriage of justice, a company breaking the law, a cover-up of wrongdoing. But it's not personal grievances. It's not bullying and harassment or discrimination that an individual feels unless that is in the public interest. Whistleblowers, I should say, are legally protected. They should not lose their job for whistleblowing. They're not bound by confidentiality clauses. I think I'm going to pass over to David to just talk about anonymity and whistleblowing, and hopefully he will then pass it back to me to make the distinction between whistleblowing and speaking up guardians. So David, can I hand the baton to you on this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Suzanne. I mean, for Crimestoppers, anonymous means anonymous. So passing on information safely and securely. No one knows who you are. There are no witness statements. There's no course. So you do stay 100% anonymous, and that can be, as Susan said, whistleblowing. But it can also be when we're working with organisations in the private sector. It is a way that people can speak up about bullying and racism and misogyny within that organisation, for example, within there. If you do give you're happy to give your name to Crimestoppers, that's fine, and that will be passed on to the investigative authority. But in the main, the majority of information that we receive is anonymous within Crimestoppers. Also, I think just to say before I hand back to Susan, we are moving the dialogue from whistleblowing to speaking up, because essentially, in most cases, it means the same thing. But we think on speaking up is a bit more positive as a term. It's distancing that associated with whistleblowing, which is very, very formal. And unfortunately, when we make come on to talk about this, is that a lot of media headlines where whistleblower becomes the victim of the process within there. And only this morning I heard firsthand from a nurse who had lost their job as a result of whistleblowing. So it's a really interesting area between whistleblowing. But I'll hand it back to Suzanne if she can the definition for her and speak up.
Thank you, David. Is it okay, Catherine, for us to just do a bit of ping pong at this moment?
Yes, absolutely. Then we'll move on to the next topic.
Well, I should say that speaking up and talking to a Speak Up Guardian is only one way that you can talk about your concerns or your worries or what you want to improve in healthcare. You can talk to your line manager, staff suggestion box. Obviously, if it fits, you can whistleblow. But speaking up in guardians, basically, you can tell a Speak Up Guardian, and they're all through the healthcare, not just at the NHS Trust, about anything that seems to be getting in the way of patient care or affecting your working life, or where you think can be improved. It can be anonymous, but I should say that unlike with Crimestoppers, with anonymity seems to be the more common way in which they present their issues. The numbers of people who wish to be anonymous have reduced over time, and it is a smaller percentage. Many wish to be confidential, which is different, and some obviously feel that they don't want not to be known. They want their name out there. And if you do have someone who speaks up to a guardian, the guardian does not investigate, but what the guardian does, it will thank the person for speaking up. So it's a conducive culture. We want you to make your voice known because that will help the organization. They will ensure that the issues are responded to, and they will feed back to you that something has happened. I think that's very important because we will talk about what stops people from speaking up, and fear of reprisal or fear of how it's going to affect your future life or nothing will be done are going to be the main themes, and I expect David and I will talk about. And the point is that if you speak up to a guardian, they will make sure something has happened and that you know what has happened. And that is, in fact, something that gives you some assurance that it was not done just for nothing. So I just wanted to make the distinction between whistleblowing and speaking to a Speak Up Guardian.
Okay, thank you. That's all very helpful to have those distinctions. So just to move us on to why we're here today, I have this sense that with culture and emergency services, there has been a tipping point. And I often explore in things that I write and people I talk to about why that's the case. And there's some very clear reasons why, in terms of the acute crises that we've been through, the awful murder of Sarah Everard. We see what happened in London Fire Brigade and the review they had after the suicide of a firefighter there. So I want to talk to us a little bit about how we've seen media attention this week as well around Shropshire Fire and Rescue Service, where messages were leaked and ITV reported with a member of staff from Shropshire who had retired and gone to the press. And I wonder, with this tipping point and change in the way that culture is perceived, whether people need to go to the media. What's gone wrong that means that people are having to go to the media to have their story heard? And I just wondered if you had views on that. We don't have to talk about the specifics, but just the general principle that if the tipping point now is actually people going to the media, then something's kind of missing in the middle, and I wonder what that is. So thoughts, Suzanne?
Well, I have to say there are a number of things going on, and it's not just in fire and rescue. We see it in healthcare, we see it in the police, as you say. We also saw it in the ambulance service, and the first Speak Up review that was done by the National Guardian Office was in the ambulance service to create a much more conducive environment for people to speak up. I think that the fact that people said we've had enough reviews with recommendations, now we've got what we need to do. And I think important for creating the better culture in the fire and rescue service, if I look at that particularly, is the fact that we now have an independent inspectorate who has actually gone out and delivered recommendations and observations about how the different fire services have similar problems. And I think the National Fire Chiefs Council recognizes this, and that it's not just London Fire Brigade, it's not just Shropshire, it's something we have to deal with. And the inspectorate, in its values and culture of fire and rescue services report, basically was looking at these areas of bullying, harassment, and discrimination, and lack of fairness and diversity, and how, in fact, you hear concerns. So you have a speak up, listen up kind of culture in which action is taken. I think the same in health service with things like the Lucy Letby convictions, the Thurwell inquiry that's going on now, the ammunition, if I put it that way, and instinct that we have got to get this better for public trust and confidence in all these different services. So I think there's a variety of reasons why. And I think it helps that the fire standards are now rolling out to support what good looks like and what leading the service means. And in fact, when we got the inspectorate's values and culture recommendation, it was for the Fire Standards Board in liaison with the National Fire Chiefs Council to, in fact, look at the standards and say, we need more about being able to speak up. It's got to be in there, and DBS checks and so forth. So I think the response of that has been very helpful. And the fact that there are these two elements now to help fire services improve, which they want to do, by the way. I haven't met a service yet that doesn't want to improve. David, what's your view on police?
Well, I think just before the view on the police, actually, I think it's really interesting that every week, as you said, Catherine, there is some sort of media headline about whistledoing or wrongdoing or speaking up within organisations. And I think, for me personally, and also kind of a massive sort of not wake-up call, but put into focus was Lucy Letby. And from what I understand from the report of the court hearings, that between 8 and 9 of the clinicians applied for anonymity in that court case on the basis that, and that anonymity was granted by the judge, was almost unprecedented on the understanding that the belief was that if anonymity wasn't granted, their evidence that they might, or the evidence given might be compromised because of the fear of speaking up. And we'll come on to, I think, some of the things around why people might fear to speak up later on. So I think that media attention on that particular case, as shocking as it was, has really brought into the attention of the need for things to change, for people to be able to speak up confidently when things are wrong. And in that case particularly, the result of people speaking up and not being taken seriously in the first instance had tragic consequences. And I think, we talk about sort of the Sarah Everard case and the thousands that went on the street as a result of that. That was a real wake-up call in terms of something needs to be done in that area. So, there is a lot going on. And, I think also there's a point where people in society, I think, and this is going to be a generational thing, younger people are less tolerant now as they come into the workplace, and they are happy to call things out. So, sort of speaking up now is something that people say, well, I don't really, I don't care too much about my job. Too much. If it's not right, I'm gonna call it out. So that's really interesting as well, and we could maybe explore that a bit later on. But for the police, we work with 2 out of 3 of the emergency services, which is so we are heavily involved with the fire service. We're very heavily involved with the police in terms of internal lines. This is around officers and employees being able to call out wrongdoing. And again, a lot of this falls out of kind of some of the reports that Suzanne talked about, but that needs to change culture within them. It has to change. And we'll come on to it later on. And then also the public, now that the public wants to be able to speak up and be able to call out when things are not quite right. So, it's a really, really interesting time in society where, we are, kind of thinking that speak up is really, really important. And how do we support that?
Yes. Okay. So both make lots of interesting points, particularly ones around this inhibition, the thing that stops people from speaking up. You've both talked about fear of reprisal, career progression being affected. Why those people wanted to be anonymous was because they didn't want to affect their careers. I think you've also mentioned to me, David, in previous discussions about the power of pension and about people being unwilling at the later end of their career to rock the boat, as it were, because they've got a few years left and they don't want to affect anything. It's interesting. There's a question here about seniority being a barrier as well, which is not something which kind of matches, I suppose, with the pension thing. So, do you think seniority is a barrier to speaking up? In particular, where rank structures exist, like the police, where senior officers are still assessed as sir or madam, may create the barrier of deference. Do you think there's anything in that? Is that something you've come across in either of those areas of work?
I think it's the power of the pension is a personal view in this, and that works. It's a two-way power of pension. Well, it's at that senior level. If you're invested heavily in your career and pension, and you only have a few years left to run in your career, would you want to compromise that and drive change to a point? Almost rock the boat. And equally, if you're in a career and you are part of a pension scheme, and we could about this fear of reprisal, or fear of exclusion, or fear of livelihood, but actually loss of pension is quite a motivator for some people, and therefore it may be an inhibitor to speak up there. But I also think, when I was preparing for this as well, and again, these are personal views, is the role of HR. Now, it's really, when we're working with the police, there are dedicated points within counter-corruption and professional standards who are trained to act on the information that's sent to them, and there is a dedicated professional unit looking at these. Not sure if that's the same in other organisations within the emergency service, but I know from the commercial organisations that we work with and support, is one of the challenges is that tends to first port of call is into HR, and my question would be is whose side are HR on? Are they there to support the employee, or are they there to protect the employer? And I think that is a really interesting area when that sometimes on complaints or not even complaints, when reports go into HR, does that HR person actually want to send that information up the chain to senior leadership to say we have a problem or we have issues that people are wanting to speak up about?
Can I go back to the? I wonder, does that come back to the deference thing again? Is there reference? Yeah. Yes, Suzanne, please do.
Catherine, I think there's another way to look at this, which is that what we have to accept is that leaders need to be as educated as the people coming into an organization, because it is leaders which set the tone of the organization. And it's interesting, for example, in the ambulance review, the recommendations there was that the leaders, like everyone else, had to be mandated training. If they're not aware of the situation, if they don't understand it, they've grown up in a different environment, then it's imperative on the organization and the service to help them come to a different realization, because only if they can see it from that perspective will they be able to cascade it. And it won't be just aspirational, it will be reality. Now, I would have thought any good HR department would be looking at what is best for the organization, which may include recognizing we have a problem. I also think they also want to protect the organization, and we have a defensive mode that comes into play. I have to protect the organization. I have to protect myself. I have to protect reputation. And I know that. But I think that we should put on really a high level of importance the need to say, you cannot assume that just because you're elderly or older or senior, that actually you know how to behave in the environment that now exists. Because, for example, firefighters come up or used to come up through the firefighting regime. You didn't have that many people coming in from other sectors. That's changing. And I think that's a good thing. And I think the service thinks it's a good thing to get others in with different perspectives. But it is this need for education that I think is crucial.
Yes, it's interesting you mentioned about the training of the senior leaders. There's a question here, or more of a statement really, saying that there should be a need to mandate speak-up training for leaders because they should be professionally committed to it in the first place.
I think I have to say, the fire standard services I've attended, there is a commitment, there is a recognition. Now, I haven't visited all of them, but there is a recognition that more needs to be done to encourage values and culture.
Yes. Okay. So we talked about deference. We talked about the pension and other sort of blockers. I'm looking now to look at what the right conditions are for speaking up. We've seen a number of reports. We've talked already about the HMI Culture and Values report. I'm interested that in that there was something there about setting up whistleblowing services in every fire and rescue service. David, do you know or have any familiarity? Do you know how many of them have actually done that through your work in Crimestoppers, and presumably you provide some of those services?
Yeah, we work with a significant proportion of fire and rescue services across the country in actually the provision of that service on behalf of that fire and rescue. And I think I just want to go back to something at the start. Actually, what I must qualify on this is we do not carry out the investigation on this. We are just the conduit by those reports are received, and we triage those reports and then pass on when it's relevant to what is relevant to the point of contact, to the point of dissemination. But yes, following that report, we are working with a range of fire and rescue services across the UK, providing that internal speak up process, and that's not only just providing the service in terms of the way that people can speak up, but it's also helping them in terms of what I think is really key. It's around creating awareness of that service. So it's all right implementing one, but if people aren't made aware of it, or is it, I think back to Susan's point about the fact that it is positively endorsed right from the top of the organisation, it would just become a tick box service. So it's really, really keen, with organisations that that the awareness of this service is paramount when people join. Not only when people join, but as they go through their professional development and their career.
Yeah. And I wonder, David, just on Crimestoppers provide services to fire and rescue services, but also recently you announced that you're providing a police anti-corruption abuse reporting service. Can you just share a little bit about Crimestoppers' role in that and what that means in terms of the speaking up culture for staff within the police?
Yeah, there's two elements to that, Catherine. So we supply, a bit like the fire and rescue service, we supply a significant amount of internal speak-up lines for police forces around the UK. And that is for police officers to be able to provide information around wrongdoing and challenges they may have within a particular force. As a result of a number of high-profile media reports, and cases within the Met actually wanted to provide a public reporting line, which was launched in November 22, and that was allowed for members of the public to be able to report incidents of abuse and corruption by police officers. And after a successful year of that, in terms of the value of the reports and the cases that were being created from that, the National Public Police Anti-Corruption and Abuse Line was launched in March 24. And we're already starting to see a significant amount of information and reports flow into that service.
And is that police officers informing or talking about their colleagues, or is this members of the public reporting into the police, or is it both?
No, it's the national line is for the public to report to police officers, and then within the forces there are internal lines for employees of police forces to be able to speak up.
Right. Okay. So we've looked at fire, we've looked at police. So Suzanne, in terms of ambulance service, the NGO National Guardian's Office had a speak up review of ambulance trusts from February 23. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that means in terms of ambulance staff being able to speak up?
Yes, this was the first review that the National Guardian Office actually conducted. And I should say we're just starting our second review, which is about those who come into UK healthcare services in England from overseas and how they find it available to speak up and easy to speak up and to be listened to. And that's a review that's starting now. But the ambulance review was the very first one, because we were finding in the National Guardian Office that the culture in the ambulance service was not that conducive for speaking up. People didn't feel safe doing so, or they felt it was futile. And they had poor experience when they did speak up of what it was like. And they didn't get much feedback when they did. So for all the things we've talked about and why people don't speak up, it was in the ambulance service. I have to say, there has been a very good reaction from the service and from the department and ministers to the review. And it was agreed there would be an independent cultural review, which has ministerial oversight, that led and has led to an action plan, which is now being actually actioned. Training has been mandated. So the necessity for everyone to be trained on speaking up, from leaders to everyone within the service. It's been important for the leadership, including those on the trust board, to be involved, and they now are required to annually evaluate the effectiveness of speaking up arrangements in their trust. And importantly, and this is something I think you have to realize, that the NGO is actually a very small organization. So you've got to have the clout of the other regulators or other bodies. In the fire service, it's the inspectorate, or it's the local government, the LGA or the Associated Police and Crime Commissioners, who hold the services to account. Here we've got CQC and NHS England, and they have both been involved in helping to make these recommendations live by actually including them in the regulatory framework and oversight. And I think it is that partnership of trying to bring all the forces together to create a positive view and a support for speaking up. So I think the ambulance review was a good sort of microcosm of what is needed, how to attack it, and what hopefully will come out at the other end. I have talked to people in the ambulance service. I visited one of them and went around with them, and they were saying it was exactly what we've been saying, and we're so glad you said it. And I know that the minister and the department are very much behind delivery of this. So I'm quite pleased that the NGO, a small organization, has had such an impact.
Fantastic, that's good to hear. David?
Catherine, I'm just building on what Suzanne said there. I think, you know, the lessons learned from the work with the police and with the fire is, you know, what works is when you have a sort of kind of an approach that says it removes, you know, if you remove the barriers to speaking up, that's so important within there. You promote this positive culture for speaking up. So it's okay to speak up. In fact, it's good to speak up. That's really important there. I think it's really important as well, especially with it, you know, we find this within the police, you have a dedicated points of investigation, so professional standards or counter-corruption. So we know where that information is going to go to. Within the NHS, we work with the NHS and the Counter-Fraud Authority. So there is a dedicated point to go to, or professionals in there. I think I said making employees aware is absolutely key. That this is just not a tick box. That there are activities from internal marketing communications that work to make people aware within that. Providing feedback and evidence, we can come on and talk about that a little bit later on. I think also there is a recognised need, and Susan mentioned there in the reports, the need to work with independent organisations as part of this. So there seems to be independence, or there is independence as part of that process, and that's why they are working well.
I have to say, there was an expression said to me the other day that speaking up is a gift to an organisation, not a detriment, but actually a gift to help them improve. And I think that's the way, if leaders saw it like that, and if it cascaded through the organisation like that, there would be a much more powerful feeling in a positive way towards speaking up.
Okay, I want us to move on to leadership as part of the route to improving things. But before we do that, I just have one question, which was just this specific to David, which is around the level of concerns that are being reported through the service. When it says that service, I'm going to assume that the questioner is asking about the police service, the anti-corruption service that you're providing. David, are you able to share any detail about the kind of concerns that people are raising, just in broad terms? Give us a sense of the size of it.
No, it's what I can say, Catherine, was that within minutes of it launching with the press in March, the service was being utilised. And we're just over a month now, and there is a significant volume of reports being created. It's too early for us to be able to share, and actually, we wouldn't want to share that kind of information on this platform.
On the sort of transparency side of things, so it's publicly funded. It's of interest to the public in terms of the volume and the data. Will there be reporting, and who are you accountable to with that service?
We're accountable to the Police Chiefs Council and the police authorities within there. So we're accountable from that perspective in the running of the service. Yeah. The police
and what reporting have they asked for? What reporting have they asked for from you to show the volumes and the sort of trends and things like that?
Yeah, so we have management information stats that are sent over on a very regular basis to them. So through normal sort of management information transfer processes.
Okay, well, hopefully we in the sort of public space will get to see some of the what that looks like in longer term. Obviously, it's only been a month, maybe 12 months time would be interesting to say. So let's move us on to how do we improve things. We've talked about the things that block it, the kind of reports, the sort of enablers, in the sense that people are looking at it. These culture is under the spotlight through these different routes, and they come up with a bunch of recommendations, and we will hope that there'll be change. But fundamentally, you can't make change happen through reports. It's just not going to happen that way. So let's have a look at what we can do to improve things. So let's talk about leadership then. We've mentioned it quite a few times in the discussion already. So Suzanne, in terms of what tools do leaders need to make sure their organisation is an open, transparent organisation that allows people to speak up and can deal with things when they go wrong?
Well, I first of all think that for leaders themselves, in the performance objectives they have and in their appraisals, they to whom they are accountable, which is local government, actually should be marked for that. They should be held accountable for how well their organization is in fact delivering, because they set the tone, they set the leadership, they set the culture. Yeah. I think I've talked about mandating training. I think they have to set themselves up as a symbol to others that they're in there doing it before others have to do it, and that they feel it is as important as all the other things they may do operationally. So it's all about, I remember being with a chief fire officer who said leading the people was an aspirational standard. And I said, I'm sorry, it's not aspirational. This is what good looks like, and this is what your organization should have. Some time ago, there has been a shift and a recognition, and I would like to give credit to the Fire and Rescue Service for recognizing, notwithstanding what happened at Shropshire, which was announced at ITV recently. I think there is a real eagerness and hunger to do better in terms of values and culture. I've also already mentioned about having a whole system approach. It's not one fire service on its own. It's not one trust on its own. This needs to be supported, backdated by the regulators and the others that have an interest in terms of education, training, observation, whatever, that it's a partnership, a web of consistency of approach to speaking up, whether it's whistleblowing through Crimestoppers, or it's Speak Up Guardian, or it's just talking to your staff, your manager. And then I think that, as I said, the leaders should stop seeing speaking up as a problem. So the perception has to change from them. It's about seeing speaking up as actually hopeful. So those to me are what are needed to improve things. And I do see green shoots. I don't know if David also smells the flowers yet, but I think there are things that are happening. And I think the fire standards contribute to that. So I want to take credit for that. But I think importantly, why not? Adverts are always good. But essentially, it is a combination of things. It isn't just one thing. And I agree with you, Catherine, that just putting up another review with another set of recommendations, that will move us on. We've had the recommendations. We had them with Robert Francis in 2015 that set up Speak Up Guardians. We know what we need to do. Now it's the problem of getting on and doing it.
Okay, so Suzanne offers us quite an optimistic view, I think, of this shift in tone and the green shoots. David, do you agree with that?
In part. Yeah, I think it's really. We talk about. We think it's the importance. Leadership needs to be curious, and has to embrace curiosity to really understand. And actually get evidence of what's happening within organisations, because there's two outcomes to that. If they do that, they either find out everything's good or pretty good, and therefore that shows that culture and environment is working. If it's not, that's also good, because then they can do something about it. If they recognise there is a range of problems that are addressing, that they're going to have to address, or are causing problems in the workplace. I'd like to just give one example, actually, and I think part of this is what else can be done is, and I will say this, but it's embracing anonymity and the power of anonymity when it comes to reporting. And if you look at the NHS England website, there's a question: can I give information anonymously or in confidence? Now, the language of that would, from my personal perspective, say they're actively discouraging people giving information anonymously, and I think this is about why would you want to do that? And they talk about we might have to disclose your information, if it was, for an example, of a vulnerable person or an adult at risk, to the courts. And your name, the person who would have, because it is not the case with Crimestoppers and some of the information we receive. If we receive information into Crimestoppers, that person is anonymous. They cannot be called to court at that point, because we simply do not know who they are. So there are many onions to this. There are many layers to this onion of providing safeguarding in organisations, and anonymity is a key one. It is absolutely a key one. And I think just another point I'd like to raise on that is it also says on the NHS statement there, it's about if you give information anonymously, please note we cannot communicate with you or unable to discuss your concerns or ask you further information. We won't be able to give you any feedback. Well, this may be the case for the NHS and the systems they have in place, but for other organisations we work with, we can provide this. So it's simply not true that you can't have a two-way conversation with someone anonymously and you can't give them feedback, because we work with organisations in the commercial world who embrace that within there. So if there's a stat I can give you, about 80% of the information we receive as an organisation is anonymous, and around 20% of those interactions that we have are two-way, using anonymous, unique code-specific drop boxes. So you can have if you want to provide feedback, you can have an anonymous conversation with somebody.
Catherine, can I come in here? David, the way the Crimestoppers work is they get anonymous information, and I respect that. But Speak Up Guardians can get information anonymously, but most choose not to give it to them that way, and that's their choice. And it is easier to investigate if you know who you're talking to, in the sort of situation you have with Speak Up Guardians, where they come to you and they tell you in confidence often, so their name is not known, or sometimes they do want to be known. So I think it's not necessarily the same environment, but I just wanted to make it clear that we can have Speak Up Guardians anonymously get information, but most people, the great majority, don't pick that way of talking to them.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that both aren't suitable ways of getting speaking up messages across.
Yeah,
but I know that David works in that way in his particular organization.
But it was interesting, Catherine, wasn't it, at the conference in March, that 44% of the audience said fear was the reason they didn't speak up. So if you provided anonymity, would that help overcome that fear?
Okay, so
well, confidentiality might do it. Anyway,
okay.
We'll leave that.
I think I'm going to go in the middle of this and say, right, we need to move this on. One of our questioners here asks us how they access the services. So we've talked about Crimestoppers, we've talked about National Guardian's Office, we've talked about Fire and Rescue Services providing lines. If somebody watching this wishes to access the services, could you just give us a very quick summary of how you would do that if you were a member of staff and you wanted to use your service? David, quickly with Crimestoppers for me, please.
Yeah, there's two ways you access it. You can access it via a free phone telephone number, or you can access it online. So that's on your tablet, your mobile, on your laptop, from anywhere
So that would just be by searching for Crimestoppers through a search engine, and they would find you that way.
If you wanted to give information about crime, yes, absolutely. So there's that number. If you were working with a specific organisation like we do with the police and the fire, they have dedicated phone numbers. They have dedicated online forms
within their own organisation. So they should have access to that in their internal systems. Great. Yeah. Okay. And in terms of National Guardian's Office, does it work the same for ambulance staff, Suzanne? Do they find the information through their own internal systems?
They should be able to find if they've got a Speak Up Guardian within their own trust or in their own healthcare provider, because it's not just trust. Many of Speak Up Guardians are not in trust. They're in primary care or other parts of the healthcare system. But if they're unsure, they can always go onto the National Guardian Office website and find out who they could speak to, who is a Speak Up Guardian. I would hope their trust or their body would have one, but not everyone does. There are over 1,000, so hopefully they'll find one.
Okay, great. So I'm just conscious, there's one question right at the beginning of our list here, which has been upvoted just by a couple of people, but we have a couple of moments if we could just do before we wrap up, and you provided your one piece of advice for our listeners to go away with. And that is around the fact that when the inspectorate does its work, so I assume that this person is asking about Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Fire and Constabulary, if they fail to identify issues, because it says here because it is embedded in senior management, which I'm not quite sure I understand what that means. But I think the point is that if the inspectorate miss it because their inspection process doesn't uncover information, then is the next step the Speak Up and Crimestoppers side of things, because that's the next route for somebody who feels it's not been addressed through an inspectorate report? What do we think?
I would have wondered if they feel the inspectorate has not got the information, why they would not tell the inspectorate. Yeah, it's difficult to know the background of that. I'm not sure how far we can go with it, but it's just an interesting point that obviously the inspectorate has a limited amount of time which you can do. It's not going to uncover absolutely everything. It may miss things, but it's obviously a concern for one of our listeners. So thank you for the question. We're not going to address any more questions. So we'll move on to asking you the last two questions, Suzanne and David, which is around the piece of advice that you would give our listeners. We've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about some difficult situations we're having in different services across the country at the moment. And they're all at different points in their journey when it comes to being able to create these open cultures that we'd like to see. So I'd like to ask you, what is your one piece of advice for someone to go away and talk to their colleagues about, or their management with, when it comes to wanting to get to that place that we want them to be? So Suzanne, could you give us that one piece of advice, please? Okay, well, I'll take it from the basis of National Guardian Office, which is that it's important that Speak Up Guardians have the resources to do their job. That is, that they're given the time and they're given the space to do it. And it's important that the organization ensures that's done. So I would think that one thing, if I can put it into parts, one thing is, first of all, find out if you have Speak Up Guardians in your organization. And secondly, ensure that they have the time and the resources to do the job properly. And also to connect with all the learning that's available on the National Guardian Office website and engage with the partnership that provides with other Speak Up Guardians. So it's a matter of making sure there is availability to speak up, and then hopefully speak up.
Okay, thank you. And David?
I think for me, it's for those who are responsible for speak up culture within organisations and driving for. I think it's absolutely their number one priority to listen to what employees are telling them. Absolutely, they have a duty to listen to that and act on it. And as part of that culture and that solution, embrace anonymity. Because the organisations we work with, when they brace anonymity, I know Susan's smiling, but when they brace it, the results, what they see is information they might normally not have access to. So embrace it.
Could I just add that it shouldn't be something occasional or something special? Speaking up, whether it's anonymous or confidentially, or you want to put your name to it, it should be business as usual. And that's what we don't have yet. It seems like it's an add-on. It's business.
Yes, absolutely. I think that you've kind of almost taken the words out of my mouth, and I was going to sort of start thinking about what we've learned today. And some of that is around how do we get to a point where speaking up is business as usual. And you're right, the organisations aren't there yet. The reviews have given the advice on what should be done. There are recommendations, and organisations will take time to do this. I think you reflect quite an optimistic view, both of you, I think, in your own ways. But you know that certainly there is plenty to be done. I'm interested in this idea of onions, layers of onions that David talks about in terms of, needing to not see it as one solid thing. It's just layers of improvement. And the green shoots that you see, Suzanne, which is very positive for you. So thank you both for your great metaphors. So that just leaves me to say thank you to you both very much for joining us today and for sharing your views on speaking up and creating a culture that we'd like all our emotion services to have in the future. So thank you for joining us. And it just leaves me to wrap up. So this webinar will be available to watch on catch up via our website. Any notes for webinar will be hosted there too. You'll receive CPD accreditation by email, and if you're watching on catch up, you'll get this as well around the end of the month. Do join us for our next webinar on the 9th of May, where we'll look at preparing for wildfires. And visit our website, emotionservicestimes.com. You can sign up for our weekly digest to stay up to date. Just leaves me to thank you for joining us today, for providing the questions. I'm sorry we haven't been able to get to them all, but hope you found the debate today interesting, and do join us next time. Thank you.